Lori Tackett. On January 11th, 1992, in rural Indiana, a group of 4 teenage girls committed one of the most disturbing crimes in the state's history. Among them was 17-year-old Lori Tackett, who would play a central role in what happened to 12-year-old Shanda Sharer that night. The events that unfolded over several hours left investigators and the public struggling to comprehend how teenagers could carry out such prolonged brutality against someone they barely knew. The group abducted Shanda from her father's home in Jeffersonville under false pretenses. Melinda Loveless, who was 16 at the time, had orchestrated the plan out of jealousy. Shanda had been dating her ex-girlfriend, Amanda Heverin. Tackett provided the vehicle and drove the group to a remote location known locally as the Witch's Castle. What happened at that location was prolonged and methodical. The group bound Shanda and subjected her to hours of physical assault. Tackett participated actively and at one point taunted their victim with words that would later be repeated in court proceedings. She told Shanda that the location was filled with human remains, and that hers would be next. Tackett had a troubled background that would emerge during her legal proceedings. She had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and had experienced hallucinations since childhood. Her mother, a strict religious figure, had once attempted to strangle her after discovering her changing clothes at school. Tackett had developed a fascination with the occult and sometimes pretended to be possessed by an entity she called Deanna the Vampire. In early 1991, Tackett had been hospitalized after incidents of self-harm. She was prescribed antidepressants and discharged in April of that year. By September, she had dropped out of high school. When she met Melinda Loveless later that year, she found someone who shared her capacity for darkness. After the assault at the Witch's Castle, the group placed Shanda in the trunk of Tackett's car. They stopped at Tackett's home to clean up, then drove to a remote field near Madison. Shanda was still alive when they doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. The group returned later to add more fuel. The crime was solved quickly. 2 of the participants, Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence, confessed to authorities that same evening. Shanda's burned remains were discovered by hunters and identified through dental records. Evidence in Tackett's car trunk confirmed her involvement. All 4 girls pleaded guilty to avoid trial and the possibility of the death penalty. Tackett admitted to murder, criminal confinement, and arson. In 1993, she was sentenced to 60 years at the Indiana Women's Prison. Tackett was released on January 11, 2018, the 26th anniversary of when Shanda's body was discovered. She had served 26 years and was released for good behavior. She completed 1 year of supervised release and now maintains a low profile in Madison, Indiana. Shanda's mother, Jacques Vaught, later reflected on the tragedy, stating, "If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better." The case remains one of the most studied examples of juvenile perpetrators committing extreme acts. Melinda Loveless, who had orchestrated the plan, later expressed the mindset that drove them that night. She said she couldn't wait to carry out what they did to Shanda. The statement revealed the premeditation that went into the crime. This was not an impulsive act, but something Loveless had anticipated with eagerness. The 4 perpetrators received different sentences based on their levels of involvement. Tackett's 60-year sentence reflected her active participation throughout the night. The case has been the subject of multiple books and documentaries, examining how teenagers could commit such acts against someone they barely knew. The next case would involve a standoff with law enforcement that lasted over 30 minutes. Nicole Jackson. In June 2021, in Volusia County, Florida, deputies responded to a burglary call at a residence. What they encountered was not a typical break-in. They found themselves in an armed confrontation with two juveniles who had barricaded themselves inside the home with an arsenal of stolen weapons. Nicole Jackson was 14 years old at the time. She and a 12-year-old boy had run away from a group home and broken into the residence, where they discovered multiple firearms, including an AK-47, a shotgun, and several handguns. When deputies arrived, the juveniles did not surrender. They opened fire. The shootout lasted more than 30 minutes. Deputies took cover as rounds from the AK-47 and other weapons struck around them. Body cam footage captured Nicole's voice during the incident, and her words revealed her mindset in that moment. "I'm gonna kill you all." This was what Nicole reportedly shouted at the deputies who were trying to end the situation without casualties. The statement demonstrated that despite her age, she understood the gravity of what she was doing and had lethal intent. The circumstances that led Nicole to that house remain partially unclear. She had been placed in a group home, and her decision to run away suggests instability in her living situation. Details about her family background and what led to her placement in the group home have not been extensively documented in public records. What is clear is that when she gained access to weapons, she was willing to use them against law enforcement officers. The extended duration of the shootout indicated that she was not acting impulsively, but was committed to the confrontation. Deputies exercised restraint, ultimately ending the situation without anyone losing their life. Nicole was charged with attempted first-degree murder of law enforcement officers, along with burglary and criminal mischief. The decision to charge her as an adult reflected the severity of her actions and the potential consequences had her aim been better or the deputies less fortunate. Prosecutors argued that her willingness to engage in a prolonged gunfight with law enforcement demonstrated a level of danger that warranted adult prosecution. The legal proceedings moved through the Florida court system over the following 2 years. In 2023, Nicole pleaded no contest to the charges. The plea acknowledged her responsibility while avoiding a full trial that could have resulted in an even longer sentence. Nicole was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with credit for time already served. She remains incarcerated in a Florida correctional facility as of 2025. No deputies were harmed in the incident, though the psychological impact of being fired upon by a teenager with military-grade weapons has likely stayed with those who responded that day. The case raised questions about how a 14-year-old could access such an arsenal of weapons and make the decision to use them against law enforcement. The group home system that was supposed to protect Nicole instead became a situation she felt compelled to escape from, leading her to a confrontation that will cost her decades of freedom. The next case would involve two young lovers with military aspirations and a deadly secret. Diane Michelle Zamora. Diane Michelle Zamora was born on January 21, 1978, in Crowley, Texas. She was an honor student at Crowley High School, with dreams of becoming an astronaut. When she was 14, she met David Graham through the Civil Air Patrol, and they began a relationship that would define both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. On December 4, 1995, 16-year-old Adrienne Jones was found dead near Joe Pool Lake in Grand Prairie, Texas. She had been beaten with a dumbbell and shot twice, including once execution style. The investigation would eventually reveal that her killers were two honor students with promising futures, including Diane Michelle Zamora, who was 18 years old at the time, and had just been accepted to the United States Naval Academy, one of the most prestigious military institutions in the country. Zamora and her fiancé, David Graham, had planned the murder together. Graham, who had aspirations of becoming a military pilot, had confessed to Zamora that he had been intimate with Adrienne. Rather than end the relationship or work through the betrayal, Zamora's response was to demand that Adrienne pay with her life. The obsessive nature of their relationship meant that any perceived threat had to be eliminated. The night of the murder, Graham lured Adrian into a car under the pretense of a date. Zamora hid in the back seat, waiting. When the moment came, she attacked Adrian with a dumbbell, striking her repeatedly. Then she gave Graham an order that would seal both their fates. "Kill her! Kill her!" These were the words Zamora shouted at Graham as Adrian lay injured. Graham complied, shooting Adrian twice with a 9mm handgun. One shot was to the head, execution style. They dumped her body near the lake and drove away, believing they had eliminated the threat to their relationship. Zamora had met Graham when she was 14 through the Civil Air Patrol. Both were high achievers with dreams of military careers. She wanted to be an astronaut. He wanted to be a pilot. They became engaged and planned a future together. But beneath the surface of their accomplishments was an obsessive relationship that could turn lethal when threatened. The murder remained unsolved for months. The breakthrough came when Zamora confessed to roommates at the Naval Academy. The roommates reported what they had heard to authorities, and both Zamora and Graham were arrested in 1996. The investigation uncovered physical evidence connecting them to the crime. Blood was found in Graham's car, and the 9mm handgun was discovered in his attic. The forensic evidence, combined with Zamora's confession to her roommates, built a strong case against both defendants. The trial in 1998 attracted significant media attention. Two promising young people with military academy appointments had committed a brutal murder over jealousy. The contrast between their accomplished public images and the brutality of their crime fascinated the public. The jury found Zamora guilty of capital murder after hearing testimony about the planning and execution of the attack. Zamora was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Graham received the same sentence. The two young people who had planned to build careers in the military instead found themselves facing decades behind bars for a crime driven by obsessive jealousy. In 2007, Zamora participated in a Dateline interview that included a polygraph examination. She failed on questions related to her intent, though she claimed the results were affected by countermeasures. The interview provided no new evidence that might help her case. As of 2025, Zamora remains incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas, in protective custody. Her parole eligibility will come around 2035, and she will have the opportunity to argue for release at that time. What happens when someone decides to slowly poison the person caring for them? Christina Adkins. In 2006, in Michigan, 53-year-old Virginia Bentley began experiencing mysterious health problems that baffled her family. She did not know that her 13-year-old granddaughter, Christina Adkins, who lived with her and depended on her care, was the cause of her suffering. Christina had been lacing her grandmother's medication with morphine, keeping her sick while planning something more permanent. The poisoning was gradual and deliberate. Christina administered doses that made Virginia ill without immediately killing her. The pattern continued until Christina finally gave her grandmother a fatal dose. Virginia Bentley died from morphine overdose, and initially no one suspected her teenage granddaughter. The investigation eventually focused on Christina when inconsistencies in the circumstances of Virginia's death raised questions among investigators. Toxicology confirmed the presence of morphine at lethal levels. The source was traced back to medications in the household, and Christina emerged as the only person with both the opportunity and the access to carry out such a plan. The motive behind the poisoning has never been clearly established. Christina had experienced mental health issues and had reportedly been subjected to mistreatment. There were conflicts in the household related to her homeschooling situation, but nothing adequately explained why she chose to end her grandmother's life through slow poisoning. Christina was charged as an adult due to the premeditated nature of the crime. The gradual poisoning demonstrated planning and awareness of what she was doing. This was not an impulsive act, but a calculated campaign that unfolded over days. The court proceedings took place in 2008 when Christina was 16. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in her grandmother's death. The guilty plea spared the family a trial, but did not diminish the severity of the sentence. During the proceedings, Christina addressed the court. "I really am sorry. I took someone I loved." These were her words as she expressed what she characterized as remorse. Whether the apology was genuine or calculated remained a question for those who heard it. Virginia's husband, Christina's step-grandfather, also spoke. His words captured the devastation the family had experienced. "You took her life. You took mine." The statement reflected how the loss of Virginia had destroyed not just one life, but damaged everyone connected to her. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. As of 2025, she remains incarcerated in a Michigan correctional facility. Her parole eligibility will come around 2026, and she will have the opportunity to argue that she has been rehabilitated during her years of incarceration. The case raised questions about how someone so young could carry out such a calculated act against a family member who was caring for her. Virginia Bentley had taken her granddaughter into her home, and Christina repaid that care with betrayal. The slow poisoning method demonstrated a level of planning that contradicted any claim of impulsive behavior. The next case would involve a young woman whose conviction was eventually overturned. Charlie K. Ely. In April 2011, in Summerfield, Florida, 15-year-old Seath Jackson was lured to a residence where a group of people were waiting for him. What followed was a coordinated attack that ended with Seath being beaten, shot, and his remains burned to conceal the evidence. Among those charged was 18-year-old Charlie K. Ely, whose role in the crime would be debated for years in courts and appeals. The group that attacked Seath included multiple participants with different levels of involvement. The primary aggressor was Michael Bargo, who had a dispute with Seath over a previous relationship. Others participated in the physical assault and the disposal of the body afterward. Charlie's alleged role was luring Seath to the location where he would meet his death, making her an accessory rather than a direct participant in the attack itself. The investigation moved quickly. Co-defendants provided statements that implicated everyone involved, and arrests followed. Charlie was charged with first-degree murder along with the others, despite her role being less direct than those who actually carried out the attack. Charlie had her own struggles before the incident. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety, and had stopped taking her medications. Her mental health history would become relevant in later legal proceedings, raising questions about her capacity and culpability. In 2011, Charlie was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict treated her as equally responsible as those who had physically attacked Seath, despite the differences in their actions that night. The conviction stood for nearly a decade. Then, in 2020, Charlie's legal team succeeded in having her sentence vacated. The court found that she had received ineffective assistance of counsel during her original trial. Her attorney argued that there was little evidence directly connecting Charlie to the murder beyond the statements of co-defendants who had their own reasons to minimize their roles. The defense contended that she had not actually lured Seath and that her presence at the scene did not make her a murderer. Rather than face a new trial, Charlie pleaded to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years. With credit for time already served, she was released. As of 2025, Charlie K. Ely is free and maintains a low profile in Florida. The case highlighted how different participants in a group crime can receive vastly different outcomes depending on legal representation and how evidence is presented. Charlie went from facing life in prison to walking free within the span of a few years. Seth Jackson's family had to endure the original trial, the appeals, and then the reduced sentence for one of the people convicted in his death. The justice system's reconsideration of Charlie's case did not bring their loved one back or provide the closure that a final, unchanging verdict might have offered. Michael Bargo, the primary aggressor in the attack, remains on death row for his role in Seth's murder. The contrast between his fate and Charlie's release illustrates how the same crime can result in dramatically different outcomes for different participants. The next case would involve a teenager who claimed self-defense after shooting her mother's fiancé, Sunshine Grace James. In August 2023, in a Pensacola, Florida apartment, 15-year-old Sunshine Grace James shot and killed Christopher Moore while he and her mother, Alexis Pineda, slept in their bedroom. She also shot her mother, who survived the attack. The events of that night and the circumstances leading up to them would become the subject of intense legal scrutiny over the following 2 years. Sunshine claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to her account, Moore had been harming her, and she felt she had no other option. The self-defense claim suggested that the shooting was a desperate act by a teenager protecting herself from an immediate threat. However, the evidence suggested something different. Both Moore and Pineda were asleep when the shooting occurred. An ambush of sleeping victims is inconsistent with self-defense, which typically requires an imminent threat at the moment of the act. Prosecutors argued that Sunshine had planned and executed the attack rather than responding to immediate danger. Before the shooting, Sunshine reportedly spoke words that would later be used against her claim of spontaneous self-defense. "Mama, I love y'all." This statement, made before she opened fire, suggested awareness of what she was about to do, rather than a panicked reaction to being harmed. Christopher Moore was 35 years old at the time of his death. He had been engaged to Sunshine's mother, making him a significant presence in the household for some time. Whatever conflicts existed in that home, they culminated in Sunshine deciding that lethal force was her solution to whatever problems she believed she faced. Sunshine was arrested after fleeing the scene. The investigation collected physical evidence, including gunshot wound analysis and blood evidence that reconstructed the sequence of events. The forensic findings contradicted the self-defense narrative. The case proceeded through the Florida court system over the following 2 years. In September 2025, Sunshine pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. The plea acknowledged criminal responsibility without admitting the specific facts alleged by prosecutors. Sunshine faces sentencing in January 2026. The minimum sentence will be 25 years, with the possibility of life imprisonment. She remains in custody awaiting the sentencing hearing that will determine how much of her life she will spend incarcerated. Her mother, Alexis Pineda, survived the shooting, but lost her fiancé to her own daughter's actions. The family that existed before August 2023 was destroyed that night. Regardless of what circumstances led Sunshine to pick up the weapon and pull the trigger, the case will be closely watched when sentencing occurs in January 2026. The judge will have to weigh Sunshine's youth against the calculated nature of the attack and the fact that both victims were defenseless when she opened fire. Whatever the sentence, Sunshine will spend a significant portion of her adult life incarcerated for what she did that night in Pensacola. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case would involve a hidden pregnancy and a desperate act that shocked a small Nebraska community. Chloe Coplin Anderson. In November 2023, in a bedroom in Nebraska, 16-year-old Chloe Coplin Anderson gave birth in secret. She had concealed her pregnancy from everyone around her, and when the moment came, she was alone. What happened next would result in one of the most serious sentences given to a juvenile in Nebraska in recent years. Chloe took the life of her newborn son shortly after giving birth. She used a kitchen knife to end the infant's life, then attempted to hide what she had done. The concealment was unsuccessful. Her parents discovered what had happened and contacted authorities. The investigation revealed the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy. Chloe had become pregnant at 15 by a 19-year-old male, which under Nebraska law constituted a separate offense. The pregnancy was the result of conduct that the legal system classified differently than a relationship between peers. Chloe had hidden her condition throughout, telling no one and seeking no medical care. Forensic examination of the scene found evidence consistent with Chloe's actions. The knife used was recovered from her closet, still bearing traces of what had occurred. The physical evidence left no question about what had happened in that bedroom. Chloe's background emerged during the legal proceedings. She had experienced mistreatment from family members, and no adults had intervened to help her. The trauma she carried manifested in diagnosed PTSD and major depression. Her defense team argued that these factors contributed to her state of mind during the pregnancy and afterward. Her attorney made a statement that captured the defense's position. No adults stepped in to help. The argument was that Chloe had been failed by the people who should have protected her, leaving her to face an impossible situation alone. Whether this context excused or merely explained her actions remained for the court to determine. Chloe pleaded no contest to second-degree murder in 2024. The plea acknowledged her responsibility without requiring a full trial that would have exposed every detail of what happened that night. The sentencing hearing would determine how much of her life she would spend incarcerated. On April 24, 2025, Chloe was sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison. The sentence means she will be at least 51 years old before she has any possibility of release. A teenager who had been failed by the adults around her will spend decades in a Nebraska correctional facility. The case raised difficult questions about how society handles pregnant teenagers in crisis, particularly those who have experienced trauma. Chloe made a choice that cannot be undone. But the circumstances that led to that choice involved failures at multiple levels. Her newborn son, who never had a chance at life, was the ultimate victim of a situation that spiraled beyond anyone's control. The 19-year-old male responsible for the pregnancy faced separate charges under Nebraska's statutory laws. Chloe's case highlighted the intersection of multiple systems: child welfare, health care, and criminal justice, all of which failed to identify a teenager in desperate need of help before tragedy occurred. The next case would involve a young refugee struggling to adjust to life in a new country. Sophia Koval. In May 2024, in Broward County, Florida, 14-year-old Sophia Koval fatally attacked her 79-year-old grandmother, Yevgenia, in their home. The method was blunt and direct. Sophia used a walker and a belt to inflict the injuries that ended her grandmother's life. The case would expose the struggles of a family displaced by war and a teenager who had fallen through the cracks of multiple systems. Sophia and her family had fled Ukraine after the Russian invasion disrupted their lives. The war had torn Sophia from her school, her friends, and everything familiar. When they arrived in the United States, Sophia struggled to adjust to her new reality. Her mother worked abroad to support the family, leaving Sophia often alone with her grandmother. Yevgenia had been a kindergarten teacher in Ukraine and a cancer survivor. She had dedicated her life to caring for young people, and in her final years, she was caring for her granddaughter. The relationship between grandmother and granddaughter had become strained as Sophia's behavioral issues intensified. Sophia's father, Vladimir, had sought psychiatric help for his daughter but found it unaffordable. Sophia had shown signs of distress, difficulty sleeping, behavioral problems at school, reports of being bullied. She made claims about experiencing harm that her father dismissed as creating drama. Whether those claims were true or cries for attention, they signaled a teenager in crisis. The incident on May 23, 2024, occurred after Yevgenia took Sophia's phone away. The confrontation escalated into a fatal attack. Sophia used objects at hand, a walker, a belt, to strike her grandmother repeatedly. Yevgenia did not survive the assault. Vladimir's reaction to his daughter's actions revealed the impossible position the family found itself in. In his victim impact statement, he spoke of grief that would stay with him until the end of his life. But he also expressed that he still loved his daughter and hoped she could eventually find forgiveness. A father had lost his mother at the hands of his daughter. Sophia pleaded no contest to manslaughter in October 2024. The charge reflected her age and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Rather than adult prosecution, she would face juvenile consequences. Sophia was sentenced to a 3-year maximum risk juvenile program, with release to supervision until age 21. The sentence prioritized rehabilitation over punishment, recognizing that Sophia was a product of trauma and displacement as much as personal choice. As of 2025, she remains in a Florida maximum risk juvenile facility. The Koval case illustrated how war's devastation extends far beyond the battlefield. A family fled one form of destruction only to be torn apart by another. Yevgenia survived cancer and war, but did not survive the struggles of her own granddaughter. The case also raised questions about mental health services for refugee families and the hidden costs of displacement. Sophia needed help that the family could not afford and the system did not provide. Her grandmother paid the ultimate price for those failures, even as Sophia now receives the treatment she needed all along through the juvenile justice system. The next case would involve a teenager who struck back against those she said had harmed her for years. Ashley Martinson. On March 7, 2015, in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, 17-year-old Ashley Martinson shot her stepfather, Thomas Ayers, and stabbed her mother, Jennifer Ayers. Both parents died from their injuries. Ashley then locked her younger siblings in a closet before fleeing the state. What followed was a case that forced the legal system to grapple with claims of long-term mistreatment and a violent response to that mistreatment. Ashley had endured years of mistreatment in her household. Thomas Ayers, her stepfather, had prior convictions for serious offenses, including kidnapping. Ashley claimed that both Thomas and a previous boyfriend of her mother's had subjected her to physical and other forms of harm over extended periods. Her mother, Jennifer, according to Ashley, had failed to protect her. The circumstances leading to March 7th involved an escalating conflict. Ashley had been told she could not see her boyfriend, and her privileges were revoked. This confrontation became the breaking point after years of alleged mistreatment. Ashley retrieved a shotgun and attacked Thomas first, shooting him in the neck and head. She then turned on her mother, stabbing Jennifer multiple times. Evidence of Ashley's state of mind existed before the incident. She had posted on social media, "I want to kill him so fucking bad," a statement that prosecutors used to argue premeditation. The defense countered that the post reflected the desperation of someone trapped in an unbearable situation, rather than a calculated plan. Ashley had been diagnosed with PTSD and depression, stemming from the mistreatment she described. Mental health professionals who evaluated her found evidence consistent with someone who had experienced prolonged trauma. The question became whether that trauma explained or excused what she did on March 7th. After the incident, Ashley fled to Indiana, where she was apprehended. She initially claimed self-defense, but later acknowledged her actions. Her account shifted as investigators pressed for details, ultimately settling on an admission that she had intended to end her own life, but decided Thomas deserved what happened more than she deserved to die. Ashley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide. The plea avoided a trial that would have required her siblings to testify about what they witnessed and heard that night. The court accepted her guilty plea and moved to sentencing. In 2016, Ashley was sentenced to 23 years in prison plus extended supervision. Appeals challenging the sentence were denied in 2019. As of 2025, Ashley remains incarcerated at Taycheedah Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. In interviews from prison, Ashley has said she feels happy and safe for the first time in her life, a statement that speaks to the environment she escaped as much as the one she now inhabits. She has earned her high school diploma while incarcerated and continues serving her sentence. The case forced Wisconsin courts to weigh claims of prolonged mistreatment against the reality of 2 people dead. Thomas Ayers, despite his criminal history, and Jennifer Ayers, despite her alleged failures as a mother, did not deserve to die. But the circumstances that created Ashley's desperation did not appear from nowhere. The question of how much context matters when judging a crime has no easy answer. The next case would involve identical twins who turned on their own mother. Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah Whitehead. On January 13, 2010, in Conyers, Georgia, 34-year-old Nikki Whitehead was found dead in the home she shared with her 16-year-old twin daughters, Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah. She had been beaten and stabbed in the bathroom. The twins told investigators they had discovered their mother's body, portraying themselves as grieving daughters. It would take years before the truth emerged. The Whitehead twins had a complicated history with their mother. They had been raised primarily by their great-grandmother, Della Frazier, and had been honor students and Girl Scouts. When Nikki regained custody just days before her death, the twins protested. The transition back to their mother's household created immediate conflict. The relationship between Nikki and her daughters had been marked by disputes over control and discipline. The twins viewed their mother as hypocritical and overly strict. Physical confrontations had occurred before, and the family had been through counseling and juvenile court proceedings. The situation was volatile when the twins moved back in with Nikki. The investigation initially treated the twins as witnesses rather than suspects. But forensic evidence told a different story. Bite marks found on Nikki's body were analyzed and matched to the twins. DNA evidence excluded Nikki's boyfriend, who had initially been considered a suspect. The physical evidence pointed directly at Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah. For years, the twins maintained their innocence while the case remained open. Then, in 2014, both sisters confessed to their roles in their mother's death. They described a confrontation in the bathroom that escalated into a fatal attack. One twin had beaten Nikki with a vise, while the other stabbed her. They had worked together to end their mother's life. The confessions came as part of plea negotiations. Both Jasmiyah and Tasmiyah pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The reduced charge acknowledged that the incident, while fatal, may have occurred in the heat of passion rather than through cold premeditation. The plea spared both twins from potential life sentences. Each twin was sentenced to 30 years in prison. They have been incarcerated separately, Tasmiyah at Arundel State Prison and Jasmiyah at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. The separation ensures they cannot coordinate stories or influence each other's behavior while incarcerated. As of June 2025, Tasmia is eligible for parole in March 2026, and Jasmia in September 2027. After more than 15 years of incarceration, the twins may soon have the opportunity to argue for release. Nikki Whitehead's family will have the chance to speak at those hearings about the daughter and sister they lost. The Whitehead case became one of the most studied examples of sibling co-defendants in a family homicide. The dynamics between the twins, how they influenced each other, whether one was more culpable than the other, and how they coordinated their actions, raised questions that forensic psychologists continue to examine. Their separate incarcerations were designed to prevent them from maintaining the bond that had led to their mother's death. The next case dates back decades and involved crimes so disturbing they changed how England approached juvenile offenders. Mary Bell. In 1968, in the Scotswood area of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, two young boys were found dead within months of each other. Martin Brown was 4 years old when he was discovered in May. Brian Howe was 3 years old when he was found in July. Both had been strangled. The investigation would eventually focus on an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, whose actions shocked a nation and raised fundamental questions about criminal responsibility in children. Mary had experienced severe mistreatment from her earliest days. Her mother, Betty, who was 17 when Mary was born, allegedly shouted, "Take the thing away," after delivery. As a toddler, Mary experienced multiple accidents that family members suspected were deliberate attempts on her life, including being dropped from a window and given sleeping pills. Betty worked as a prostitute and allegedly allowed clients to harm Mary during her childhood. The environment Mary grew up in was marked by poverty, neglect, and exposure to conduct no child should witness. Psychological evaluations later identified psychopathic personality traits and developmental issues linked to both genetic and environmental factors. Mary's grasp of the difference between fantasy and reality was impaired by what she had experienced. Mary strangled Martin Brown on May 25, 1968. The death was initially considered accidental. Then, on July 31st, Brian Howe was found dead with additional injuries beyond strangulation, puncture marks on his body and an M carved into his skin. The escalation suggested someone who was testing boundaries and enjoying the results. The investigation focused on Mary and a 13-year-old accomplice, Norma Bell, who was not related to Mary. Forensic evidence, including fibers from Mary's clothing, connected her to Brian's death. Under questioning, Mary's responses revealed knowledge only the perpetrator would have. When charged, her reaction was chilling. "That's all right by me." This was Mary's response when informed of the charges against her. The casual acceptance of being accused of taking two young lives demonstrated either a lack of understanding or a lack of concern that disturbed everyone involved in the case. Mary was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Her age and psychological state precluded a murder conviction. She was sentenced to indefinite detention, to be held until authorities determined she was safe to release. Mary was released in 1980 at age 23. She was given a new identity to protect her from potential retaliation. In 2003, a court order extended lifelong anonymity to her daughter and granddaughter as well. As of 2025, Mary Bell's whereabouts remain unknown and protected by law. In 1998, Mary participated in interviews for a book titled Cries Unheard. She reflected on her actions. "I didn't know I had intended for them to be dead forever." The statement captured the disconnect that had allowed an 11-year-old to take two lives without fully grasping the permanence of death. The Mary Bell case transformed how the British legal system approached juvenile offenders. Her case demonstrated that children were capable of acts previously thought to be beyond their comprehension. and that the circumstances of a child's upbringing could create the conditions for such acts. The lifelong anonymity granted to her acknowledged both the severity of her crimes and the possibility of rehabilitation over decades. Martin Brown and Brian Howe were remembered by their families long after Mary Bell disappeared into a new identity. The two young boys who became her victims never had the chance to grow up, while their killer was eventually given the opportunity to build a life under a different name. The final case would involve the only woman currently on death row in Tennessee, Krista Gale Pike. On January 12, 1995, in Knoxville, Tennessee, 18-year-old Krista Gale Pike and two accomplices lured 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer to a remote area near a Job Corps facility. What followed was one of the most brutal crimes in Tennessee history. An extended attack that included torture, mutilation, and the keeping of a trophy from the victim's body. Krista's childhood had been marked by instability and neglect. Her parents had tumultuous marriages filled with infidelity and conflict. Her paternal grandmother, who Krista later described as the only person who ever loved her, died in 1988. Krista attempted suicide multiple times, starting in elementary school, and spent time in psychiatric treatment and juvenile facilities. By the time she arrived at the Knoxville Job Corps Center, Krista had developed an interest in the occult and formed a relationship with a fellow student named Tatterell Shipp. The motive for attacking Colleen was jealousy. Krista believed Colleen was interested in Tatterell. What should have been teenage rivalry instead became something far darker. Krista and her accomplices attacked Colleen with a box cutter and a meat cleaver. They carved a pentagram into her chest. When Colleen was still alive, they smashed her skull with a chunk of asphalt. The attack continued even after death was certain. Krista kept a piece of Colleen's skull as a souvenir, later showing it to other students at the Job Corps facility. The investigation moved quickly once Krista began displaying her trophy. Her willingness to show others what she had done led directly to her arrest. The physical evidence, combined with her own statements, left no doubt about her involvement. When questioned about the attack, Krista offered an explanation. "We were merely trying to scare her. It got out of control." The statement was contradicted by the extended nature of the attack and the deliberate mutilation of Colleen's body. This was not an incident that got out of control. It was sustained brutality. Krista was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the modern era of capital punishment in the United States. Her co-defendant, Tatterell Shipp, received life in prison, while the third accomplice received a lesser sentence for her role. For nearly 30 years, Krista has remained on death row, pursuing appeals and attempting to have her sentence reduced. In 2023, an appeal based on her juvenile status was denied. The courts have consistently upheld both her conviction and her sentence. In late 2025, Tennessee issued an execution warrant for Krista Pike. Her execution is scheduled for September 30th, 2026. If carried out, she will be the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. Krista currently resides at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, awaiting either a successful appeal or the execution date that has finally been set after 3 decades. Colleen Slemmer's family has waited just as long for the justice system to complete what began when their daughter was taken from them in 1995. The Pike case remains one of the most disturbing in Tennessee criminal history. The combination of premeditation, extended torture, occult symbolism, and trophy-keeping placed it in a category of severity that has kept Krista on death row for nearly 30 years. While other juvenile offenders have had their sentences reconsidered in light of evolving standards, Krista's case has withstood every challenge. Colleen Slemmer was 19 years old when she died, barely an adult with her entire life ahead of her. She went to meet people she thought were her friends and instead encountered something beyond comprehension. Her final moments were spent in terror and pain, while someone who claimed to have no intention of causing permanent harm carved a pentagram into her chest and crushed her skull with a piece of asphalt. Valessa Robinson. Valessa Robinson was 15 years old in 1998 when events unfolded in her Tampa suburb home that would change her life permanently. She had been dating Adam Davis, a 19-year-old with a criminal record, despite her mother, Vicki Robinson's strong disapproval of the relationship and concerns about Davis's influence. The tension between Valessa and her mother had been building for months, with Vicki becoming increasingly concerned about her daughter's choices, her involvement with substances, and the control Davis appeared to have over her life. The relationship had become the central point of conflict in the Robinson household, with Vicki feeling she was losing her daughter. Vicki Robinson made the decision to send Valessa to a Christian boarding school in an attempt to separate her from Davis and provide structure. This plan became the catalyst for what would follow. On the night the events occurred, Valessa was under the influence of LSD along with Davis and another teenager named John Wispel. The three were at the Robinson home when they turned on Vicki. The attack on Vicki Robinson involved choking, bleach injection, and multiple fatal stabbing wounds. After Vicki had passed away from the attack, the three attempted unsuccessfully to bury her body in multiple locations. They eventually placed her body in a trash can and concealed it in shrubs near the home. The group then took Vicki's vehicle and credit cards, beginning a cross-country flight that suggested they had no immediate plan beyond escaping. The three drove from Florida toward Texas, using Vicki's stolen credit cards along the way to purchase food, gas, and other items they needed during their flight. Their journey ended when they were apprehended following a high-speed chase with Texas law enforcement officers who had been alerted to the stolen vehicle. The arrest came after authorities had connected them to Vicki's disappearance and the stolen vehicle through witness reports and credit card usage patterns. Once in custody, the three were extradited back to Florida to face charges, beginning a legal process that would take years to fully resolve. The trial proceedings revealed conflicting accounts of who had initiated and carried out the acts against Vicki, with testimony painting different pictures of Valessa's role. John Wispel testified that Valessa had both initiated the plan and actively participated in the attack on her mother, describing specific actions she had taken. His testimony painted Valessa as a driving force, rather than a passive bystander who had simply been present. However, Valessa's defense team argued that she had been manipulated by Davis and that the substances she had taken had impaired her judgment and decision-making to the point where she could not fully comprehend what was happening. They emphasized her youth and the influence that older individuals had over her. The trial lasted 10 days, and the jury deliberated for 17 hours before reaching verdicts. Valessa was 17 years old by the time she was convicted of third-degree offense, grand theft, and auto theft. She received a sentence of 20 years total, with 15 years for the offense and 5 years for the theft charges. One juror later commented on the complexity of the case, noting that they did not rush to judgment, acknowledging that the decision had been difficult given Valessa's youth and the circumstances. However, family members who spoke at sentencing expressed that they sought the maximum penalty due to what they perceived as Valessa's lack of remorse. Adam Davis received an execution sentence, which was later affirmed on appeal. John Wispel was sentenced to 25 years for his role in the events. Valessa Robinson was released from the Homestead Correctional Institution in December 2013 at the age of 30, after serving 13 years of her 20-year sentence due to accrued gain time for good behavior. Since her release, she has maintained a private life, From Florida's highways to Delaware's woodlands, the next case would show how friendship could mask darker intentions. Annika Stalczynski. Annika Stalczynski was 17 years old in October 2020 when she became involved in a plan that would end with the passing of her friend, Madison Sparrow. Madison Sparrow was also 17 and had known Annika through school connections in the Newark, Delaware area. What Madison did not know was that Annika had been communicating with Noah Sharp, and together they were planning something that would target her specifically. The planning for the attack began approximately 10 days before it was carried out, with extensive digital communications documenting the conspiracy. Annika and Noah exchanged text messages and met in person to discuss the specific details of how they would carry out their plan, including what weapons they would use and where the attack would take place. The motivation for targeting Madison appeared to stem from Noah Sharp's belief that Madison had been spreading rumors about him that were damaging his reputation. Annika would later express doubt about whether these rumors had actually existed or had been fabricated by Noah to manipulate her into participating in something she would not have done otherwise. The plan involved luring Madison to a wooded area where they could attack her without witnesses. On the day of the attack, Madison went to the location believing she was meeting with Annika as a friend. Once Madison was in the wooded area, Annika and Noah ambushed her, using weapons they had prepared in advance to carry out a fatal beating. After the attack, Annika and Noah attempted to dispose of Madison's body in ways that would prevent her from being easily discovered. They dragged her body from the initial attack site to a different location, leaving a trail that forensic investigators would later piece together. They attempted to place Madison's body in a river, hoping the water would carry it away or that it would be difficult to find. Though this effort was not successful in concealing the evidence, Madison's body was eventually discovered near a warehouse in the area, and the discovery prompted an immediate missing persons investigation. The police investigation led authorities to Annika and Noah through witness statements and digital evidence. The text messages between Annika and Noah provided a clear record of their planning and coordination. When confronted with this evidence, both were arrested and charged with first-degree offense and conspiracy. In May 2022, Annika Stalczynski entered a guilty plea to both charges. As part of her plea agreement, she agreed to testify against Noah Sharp at his trial. Her testimony provided prosecutors with detailed accounts of how the plan had been formed and executed. During her own sentencing hearing, Annika expressed remorse, stating that she wished she could take everything back and acknowledging that her actions were wrong. Annika Stalczynski was sentenced to life in prison, suspended after serving 20 years of Level 5 incarceration. Under Delaware's juvenile sentencing laws, she will be eligible for a sentence modification hearing after 20 years, approximately in 2041. While Annika targeted a friend, the next case would strike even closer to home. Courtney Schulhoff. Courtney Schulhoff was 16 years old in 2004 and living with her father, Stephen Schulhoff, in an Altamonte Springs, Florida apartment after her parents' divorce. Her parents had divorced when she was younger, and Courtney had chosen to live with her father rather than her mother, though the reasons for this choice would later become part of the trial narrative. By 2004, Courtney had dropped out of school and was spending most of her time with Michael Maureen, a 20-year-old man who had been experiencing homelessness and had a criminal record that included vehicle theft and other offenses. Stephen Schulhoff strongly disapproved of Courtney's relationship with Maureen. The disapproval escalated to the point where Stephen cut off Courtney's access to credit cards and imposed other restrictions in an attempt to end the relationship. Courtney also later claimed that her father had been mistreating her, though these allegations became a point of dispute during legal proceedings. The plan that Courtney and Michael developed involved Michael attacking Stephen, while Courtney ensured the weapon would be available and accessible. On the night of the attack, Courtney placed a baseball bat near the door of the apartment where Stephen would not immediately notice it, but where Michael would know exactly where to find it when he entered. Michael Morin entered the apartment while Stephen was there and used the bat to carry out a fatal bludgeoning attack, striking Stephen multiple times. The attack was brutal and left Stephen with severe injuries that caused his passing. After the attack, Courtney and Michael had planned to dispose of Stephen's body by throwing it off a bridge. However, they fled the scene before carrying out this part of the plan. Michael Morin's mother discovered Stephen's body in the apartment after Courtney and Michael fled to her home in Winter Haven and confessed to the crime. It was her call to the police that led to their immediate apprehension. The two were apprehended while attempting to flee the area. During questioning, both provided statements about what had occurred, though they differed in their accounts of who had initiated the plan and what the motivations had been. Courtney was tried as an adult given the severity of the charges and the premeditated nature of the planning. The prosecution presented evidence of the coordination between Courtney and Michael, including the strategic placement of the weapon and the plans they had made for disposal of Stephen's body. The trial took place in 2006, and Courtney Schulhoff was convicted of first-degree offense. She was initially sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. However, following a Supreme Court ruling regarding sentences for juveniles, Courtney was resentenced in 2017 to 40 years in prison. After her conviction, Courtney made a statement in which she accepted full responsibility for what had happened, acknowledging that she had taken her father's life. This admission came after the trial had concluded and represented a shift from her earlier defense positions. Michael Morin was also convicted and received a life sentence. The case was later featured on the television program Snapped, which examined the relationship dynamics and the events leading up to Stephen's passing. The program explored how parental disapproval of relationships can escalate into dangerous situations when not handled appropriately. From a father who opposed a relationship to a father who became the subject of darker accusations. Mindy Berenyi. Mindy Berenyi was 16 years old in 1995 when she shot her father Andy Berenyi with a shotgun in their rural Ohio home. The shooting occurred when Andy was sitting on the couch reading a newspaper. The prosecution used the trajectory of the buckshot and the fact that he was shot from behind to argue that it was an ambush rather than a response to an immediate threat. After firing the shotgun, Mindy stayed with her father as he passed away from his wounds, making no attempt to call for help or leave the scene. She then went to a bathroom and contemplated taking her own life with the same weapon, though she ultimately decided against it. Mindy's claim from the beginning was that she had acted in self-defense. She stated that her father had been mistreating her for an extended period, beginning when she was 15 years old. Mindy also expressed fear that she might have become pregnant as a result of this treatment. Her defense team would build their case around these allegations, arguing that Mindy had been acting to protect herself from ongoing harm. After the shooting, Mindy went to the sheriff's department and provided a confession. In her statement, she said that she had gotten angry, moved the gun, and shot it. This phrasing would become central to the prosecution's argument that the shooting had been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act of self-defense. Prosecutors argued that the fact that Andy had his back turned when shot indicated premeditation and planning rather than an immediate response to a threat. The case divided Mindy's family sharply along lines that would never fully heal. Her stepmother vehemently denied the allegations of mistreatment, maintaining that Andy had been a good father and that Mindy's claims were fabricated to justify what she had done. Mindy's biological mother, however, supported her daughter's self-defense claim, and testified on her behalf during the trial, creating a family rift that played out in the courtroom. This family division played out publicly during the legal proceedings, with different family members offering completely contradictory accounts of what life in the Berenier household had been like. Mindy Berenier went through multiple trials. She initially entered a no contest plea, but this was later vacated. Her third trial took place in 1999, and she was convicted of aggravated offense. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 23 years. Mindy Berenier was released from the Ohio Reformatory for Women in January 2015 after serving approximately 19 years of her life sentence. Since her release, there have been no significant public updates about her life or whereabouts. The case remains one that raises difficult questions about how courts should handle self-defense claims when the alleged threat is not immediate. The lack of physical evidence supporting Mindy's allegations of ongoing mistreatment made the case particularly challenging for jurors, who had to weigh her testimony against other family members' accounts. While Mindy claimed protection from harm, the next case would involve someone who had been forced into circumstances beyond her control. Cyntoia Brown. Cyntoia Brown was 16 years old in 2004 when she shot Johnny Allen, a 43-year-old man, during an encounter in Nashville, Tennessee that would become one of the most debated cases in recent criminal justice history. The circumstances leading to this event involved Cyntoia being trafficked by a man known as Cutthroat, who forced her into situations where she would engage with men for money that he would then collect from her. Cyntoia had been adopted by Ellinette Brown, but her childhood was marked by behavioral issues and early exposure to trauma. Forensic reports during the trial also highlighted that Cyntoia suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome, which affected her impulse control and cognitive development. She later became involved with Cutthroat. Cutthroat was controlling and physically harmful, and he had made it clear that Cyntoia was expected to bring him money through these encounters or face consequences. Words attributed to him included statements about how some people were born for this life and needed to learn to be good at it, reflecting his dehumanizing view of Cyntoia's situation and his control over her. On the night in question, Cyntoia went to Johnny Allen's home as part of an arranged encounter that Cutthroat had set up. During the encounter, Cyntoia claimed that Johnny Allen reached for what she believed was a weapon. Fearing for her safety, Cyntoia shot Allen and then fled the scene, taking some of his belongings with her. The investigation traced Cyntoia through the silver Ford Explorer she was driving, which belonged to Johnny Allen. Police spotted the vehicle parked outside the house she shared with her boyfriend, Geddes Patrick, known as Cutthroat. She was arrested and charged with first-degree offense. At trial, the prosecution argued that Cyntoia had shot Allen with the intention of robbing him, pointing to the fact that she had taken his belongings. The defense argued that Cyntoia had acted in self-defense and that her status as a trafficking victim should be considered. Cyntoia Brown was convicted of first-degree offense and sentenced to life in prison, which under Tennessee law meant she would serve a minimum of 51 years before being eligible for a parole consideration. The sentence sparked significant public debate about how the criminal justice system treats trafficking victims, particularly juveniles who commit acts while under the control of traffickers. Advocacy groups argued that Cyntoia had been a victim herself, and that her actions should be viewed through the lens of someone who had been exploited and feared for her life. Celebrities and activists took up her cause, bringing national attention to the case and arguing that her sentence was unjust given the circumstances. In 2019, after Cyntoia had served 15 years, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted her clemency. She was released from prison and has since become an advocate for criminal justice reform and support for trafficking victims. Her case has been cited in discussions about how courts should handle cases where defendants have been victims of trafficking or other forms of exploitation. From a case that sparked national clemency debates to one that would involve claims even more disturbing. Miranda Barber. Miranda Barber was 19 years old in November 2013 when she and her husband, Elit Barber, placed an advertisement on Craigslist that would lure an unsuspecting victim. The advertisement was designed to lure someone for what appeared to be an encounter, using language that would appeal to men seeking such arrangements. Troy LaFerrara, a 42-year-old man, responded to the advertisement and arranged to meet Miranda at a predetermined location. When Troy LaFerrara got into the vehicle with Miranda, Elit was hiding in the back seat. The couple attacked Troy, strangling him and stabbing him 20 times while he was trapped in the car. After the attack, they dumped Troy's body in an alley and then cleaned the vehicle. The couple then went out to dine as if nothing had happened. When investigators questioned Miranda about why they had targeted Troy LaFerrara, her response was chilling. She stated that she and Elit had wanted to commit an act together, describing it as something they desired to experience as a couple. There was no financial motive, no personal grudge against Troy, and no apparent reason beyond the couple's desire for the experience itself. The investigation linked the Barbers to Troy's passing through phone records that showed communications between Miranda and Troy before their meeting, creating a digital trail that investigators could follow. The digital trail made it possible for authorities to identify and arrest both Miranda and Elit relatively quickly, as the phone records provided clear evidence of who had been in contact with Troy and when those communications had occurred. Additionally, forensic evidence from the vehicle and the location where Troy's body had been dumped provided physical links between the Barbers and the offense. Both Miranda and Elit Barber pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. While they avoided the death penalty, the first-degree plea was necessary to secure their sentences of life without the possibility of parole. They were each sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release in 2014. However, what came after the sentencing would add another layer of complexity to an already disturbing case. In a February 2014 interview with the Sunbury Daily Item, Miranda claimed she had killed at least 22 people as part of a satanic cult, starting when she was 13 years old in Alaska. These claims sparked a massive investigation across law enforcement agencies in multiple states, with detectives attempting to match her claims to unsolved cases. Investigators reviewed cold cases, missing persons reports, and unsolved incidents in states where Miranda claimed to have been active. However, investigators were unable to verify any of Miranda's claims about additional victims despite extensive efforts and coordination with law enforcement across the country. No bodies, missing persons reports, or other evidence emerged that could corroborate her statements about these alleged prior incidents. Law enforcement officials ultimately concluded that Miranda had likely fabricated the claims for attention or other personal reasons, as no physical evidence or credible leads connected her to any other unsolved cases. Miranda's background included allegations of childhood mistreatment and later claims of other experiences, though many details remained unverified. She had also been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which may have contributed to some of her statements and behaviors. Despite the unverified nature of her claims about being a prolific offender, the case of Troy LaFerrara alone was sufficient to ensure she would never be released. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From false claims of serial acts, the next cases would prove that reality needed no exaggeration to shock. Caitlin Coons. Caitlin Coons had spent time in foster care before becoming involved with Jonathan Jones, a 33-year-old man who would become central to her life. By the time she was 17, Caitlin had run away from her living situation, and the relationship with Jones had become the center of her life, consuming all her attention and energy. Jonathan Jones had previously been convicted of offenses related to the relationship with Caitlin due to the significant age difference between them, which had been deemed inappropriate by authorities. Despite these legal issues, the relationship had continued, creating ongoing tension with Jonathan's family. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's mother, had expressed strong disapproval of the relationship between her son and Caitlin from the very beginning. Nicole's interference in the relationship had become a source of ongoing conflict, with her attempting to separate Jonathan from Caitlin through various means. This interference would ultimately lead to a plan that would end with Nicole losing her life. In May 2023, Caitlin delivered an ultimatum to Jonathan that would set events in motion. She gave him 5 hours to end his mother's life, making it clear that if he did not carry out the act, she would do it herself. Jonathan did not follow through on the ultimatum within the specified time frame. When the 5 hours had passed, Caitlin proceeded with the plan on her own. Caitlin attacked Nicole Jones using a rock to bludgeon her, and then strangled her to ensure she would not survive. After the attack, Caitlin and Jonathan moved Nicole's body and placed it in a dumpster, attempting to conceal what had occurred and delay discovery. The disposal of the body suggested they hoped it would not be discovered quickly, or that it would be difficult to trace back to them. The two then made plans to leave the area, ultimately deciding to flee to Mexico to avoid prosecution. Caitlin's admission of what she had done came through text messages she sent to others. She texted someone stating directly that she had ended someone's life, providing investigators with clear evidence of her involvement. This digital confession became central to the case against her. After the attack, Caitlin and Jonathan fled the area, eventually making their way to Mexico in an attempt to avoid arrest. However, law enforcement was able to track them down, and they were arrested and extradited back to face charges. The investigation revealed the timeline of events and the planning that had gone into the attack. Both Caitlin Coons and Jonathan Jones were charged with aggravated offenses related to Nicole's passing. In June 2024, both entered no contest pleas to the charges. The no contest plea meant that they were not admitting guilt, but were acknowledging that the prosecution had sufficient evidence to convict them. Caitlin Coons was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. This means she will not be eligible for parole consideration until she has served a quarter-century behind bars. In June 2024, Jonathan Jones was sentenced to 28 years to life in prison for his role in the cover-up and his failure to prevent the crime, a shorter minimum term than the 33 years to life initially sought by the prosecution. The case raised questions about how relationships with significant age gaps can create unhealthy dynamics, and how interference from family members, while well-intentioned, can sometimes escalate situations. As of 2025, Caitlin Coons remains incarcerated with no significant updates to her case. From a mother trying to protect her son to a family targeted by complete strangers on a highway. Crystal Sturgill. Crystal Sturgill was born on March 13, 1979 in Kentucky, and experienced a childhood marked by instability and allegations of mistreatment from family members. By the time she was 17, she had claimed that her stepfather had mistreated her, leading to her leaving home and beginning a period of extreme instability. In the months before the events that would change her life permanently, Crystal had lived in 13 different places in a relatively short time frame, reflecting the chaos and complete lack of stability in her circumstances. she bounced between friends' homes, temporary shelters, and other unstable living arrangements. Despite these difficulties, Crystal had been an above-average student academically, but she had also begun using substances, including alcohol and other materials. She had no criminal history prior to the events of 1997. By early 1997, Crystal was 18 years old and had become associated with a group of 5 other individuals who shared her unstable lifestyle. On April 6, 1997, Crystal and her 5 associates encountered the Lilla Lid family at a rest stop in Tennessee. The Lilla Lid family consisted of Vidar and Delphina Lilla Lid and 2 others who were with them that evening. The group that Crystal was part of decided to target the Lilla Lid family for their vehicle, planning to take it for their own use. The group forced the Lilla Lid family into a vehicle at the rest stop and drove them to a remote location away from potential witnesses. Once at the isolated spot far from the highway, the group opened fire on the family members using handguns of different calibers. Forensic analysis revealed that 9mm and .25 caliber weapons had been used in the attack. 3 members of the Lilla Lid family, Vidar, Delphina, and 6-year-old Tabitha, lost their lives. The sole survivor was 2-year-old Peter, who was shot twice in the head but was too young to provide verbal testimony about the events. After the shooting, the group took the Lilla Lid family's van and fled the scene. Law enforcement was able to apprehend all 6 individuals relatively quickly after the incident. The investigation into the attack revealed that the motive had been theft of the vehicle. There had been speculation about whether the group had been involved in some form of organized belief system that might have influenced their actions, though this was never definitively established. What was clear was that the attack had been planned and executed by the group working together. Crystal Sturgill was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years. And while Tennessee law allows for the possibility of parole after 51 years, her consecutive sentencing structure means she is effectively serving life without the possibility of release. Later, Crystal attempted to have her guilty plea overturned, arguing that she had been on certain prescribed materials at the time she entered the plea, and that this had affected her ability to make an informed decision about accepting responsibility. She claimed that her mental state at the time of the plea had been compromised, and that she should be allowed to withdraw it and potentially go to trial. However, the courts denied her appeal, finding that her plea had been voluntary despite the circumstances, and that there was no legal basis to overturn it. One of Crystal's co-defendants made a statement years later expressing regret, saying that if he had known what would happen, he would never have left home. This statement reflected the reality that the 6 individuals involved had made choices that would define the rest of their lives and end the lives of innocent people who had simply stopped at a rest area. As of 2025, Crystal Sturgill remains incarcerated and has no possibility of release. At age 46, she has now spent nearly 3 decades in prison. The case continues to be remembered in Tennessee as one of the most senseless acts targeting a family who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. While Crystal's case involved a group targeting strangers, the next would show how family tensions could explode in an instant. Carly Madison Gregg. Carly Madison Gregg was born on April 23, 2009 in Mississippi, and grew up in what appeared to be a close family. The family had experienced tragedy with the passing of Carly's sister due to a genetic condition, and this loss had brought them closer together. Carly was academically gifted, having skipped a grade and scored well on standardized tests at a young age. She was also artistic and seemed to be thriving in many ways. However, there was a history of mental health conditions in Carly's family, including instances of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, affecting multiple family members. By early 2024, when Carly was 14 years old, concerns about her own mental health had begun to emerge among those close to her. There were indications that Carly might have been experiencing symptoms that required attention and possibly treatment adjustments, though the full extent of her mental health struggles was not yet fully understood. Some observers would later question whether recent changes to her treatment plan might have contributed to the crisis that was developing. On March 19, 2024, a dispute occurred between Carly and her mother, Ashley Smiley, regarding Carly's use of cannabis. The dispute escalated in ways that no one could have anticipated. Carly retrieved a .357 Magnum from her parents' bedroom and shot her mother, Ashley Smiley, 3 times, a detail the prosecution used to demonstrate intentionality rather than a single accidental discharge. After shooting her mother, Carly did not leave the scene or attempt to hide what she had done. Instead, she waited for her stepfather Heath to return home. When Heath arrived, Carly ambushed him, shooting at him as well. Heath survived the attack with injuries and was able to provide testimony about what had occurred. Carly was arrested at the scene and charged with first-degree offense and attempted offense. During the investigation and trial, Carly's defense team argued that she had been experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of the events. They presented evidence that Carly had been showing signs of distress and that her mental state had deteriorated. Heath testified during the trial about Carly's state immediately after the shooting, describing her as appearing disoriented and not fully present. This testimony supported the defense's argument that Carly had not been in a normal state of mind when she committed the acts. The defense maintained that Carly had been in a mental health crisis and that this should be considered in determining her culpability and sentencing. However, the jury convicted Carly of first-degree offense. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release, a sentence that sparked immediate controversy given her age at the time of the offense. Carly's legal team has filed an appeal to the Mississippi Supreme Court, arguing that sentencing someone who was 14 at the time of the offense to life without release violates state law and constitutional protections for juveniles. Following her conviction in September 2024, Carly's legal team filed their initial notice of appeal. The Mississippi Supreme Court is expected to review the case in 2026, specifically addressing the constitutionality of a life without parole sentence for a 14-year-old. The case has drawn attention from advocates who argue that juveniles, especially those with documented mental health issues, should not receive sentences that offer no possibility of eventual release. These advocates point to research showing that adolescent brains are still developing, and that even those who commit serious acts as teenagers may be capable of rehabilitation with proper treatment. From Mississippi's courtrooms to Colorado's mental health institutions, the next case would involve someone whose break from reality was undeniable. Isabella Guzman. Isabella Guzman was born in June 1995 and began showing behavioral difficulties from around the age of 7. Throughout her childhood, Isabella was moved between her parents' homes as they attempted to manage her increasingly challenging behavior. The family struggled to understand what was causing Isabella's issues, and she did not receive a diagnosis of schizophrenia until after the events that would change everything. Isabella's relationship with her mother, Yoon Mi Hoi, had become strained over the years. By 2013, when Isabella was 18 years old, she was experiencing delusions that would later be identified as symptoms of schizophrenia. Isabella had developed a belief system that was not based in reality, and this belief system would drive her to commit an act that horrified investigators. On August 28, 2013, Isabella attacked her mother in their home in what would become one of the most disturbing cases in Colorado history. The attack involved stabbing Yoon Mi Hoi 79 times, and with the face, neck, and torso, with a total of 151 injuries documented by the coroner, indicating an extreme level of frenzy. The number of wounds and the nature of the attack suggested someone who was not acting rationally or with any sense of reality. Forensic examination revealed that Yoon Mi-hoi's throat had been slashed, and that the bathroom where much of the attack occurred was soaked with evidence of the prolonged assault. The scene itself told investigators that this was not a case of someone acting with clear intent, but rather someone experiencing a severe break from reality. After the attack, Isabella fled the scene covered in evidence of what had occurred. She was eventually captured in a parking garage, and her appearance and behavior when apprehended suggested someone who was not connected to reality. Isabella's delusions were complex. She believed her mother was not her real mother, but an imposter named Cecilia. And she claimed she had to kill her to save the world from an impending apocalypse. This statement would become central to understanding Isabella's mental state. The delusion that she needed to save the world by harming her mother was a clear indication of schizophrenic thought patterns. Mental health professionals who evaluated Isabella after her arrest diagnosed her with schizophrenia and determined that she had been experiencing a psychotic episode at the time of the attack. Isabella's legal team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. The court accepted this plea after reviewing the extensive psychiatric evaluations. Rather than being sentenced to prison, Isabella was committed to a mental health facility for an indefinite period. Isabella has been housed at the Colorado Mental Health Institute, where she receives ongoing treatment for her schizophrenia under the supervision of psychiatric professionals. In 2021, she was granted permissions to participate in therapy activities outside the facility under supervision, representing a step in her treatment progress. As of 2025, Isabella remains institutionalized, with reports indicating that her condition has stabilized with treatment, but that she continues to require intensive psychiatric care and monitoring. The decision about if and when Isabella might ever be released from institutional care rests with mental health professionals who assess whether she continues to pose a danger to herself or others. The case raised important questions about how society handles individuals with severe mental illness who commit acts during psychotic episodes. Unlike cases where defendants claim mental illness strategically, Isabella's schizophrenia was thoroughly documented and undeniable. From Colorado's mental health system to Louisiana's courts, the next case would involve a plot that remained murky in its motivations. Jermaine Lewis. Jermaine Lewis was born around 2006 and lived with her mother, Markeisha Stone, in a Baton Rouge apartment complex. Limited information is available about Jermaine's childhood or what may have led to the deep resentment that would become apparent. There were no public allegations of mistreatment or other factors that might explain what would unfold. In October 2022, 17-year-old Jermaine Lewis orchestrated the murder of her mother. She enlisted 17-year-old Dwayne Barfield and an additional accomplice, 17-year-old Kelston Smith, to carry out the shooting, offering him something in exchange for his participation. Jermaine convinced or paid Barfield to carry out the shooting, providing him with information about when and where the act should occur. The planning involved coordination between the two teenagers over a period of time before the act was carried out. The shooting took place at the apartment complex where Jermaine and Markeisha lived. Markeisha Stone was shot and passed away from her wounds. The investigation into Markeisha's passing quickly revealed that this had not been a random act, but rather something planned. Both Jermaine Lewis and Dwayne Barfield were arrested and charged with offenses related to Markeisha's passing. During the legal proceedings, Dwayne Barfield provided statements indicating that Jermaine had been the one who convinced him to carry out the shooting. He stated that she had convinced him to participate, making clear that the plan had originated with Jermaine. In late 2024, Jermaine Lewis pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. The sentencing occurred in early 2025, resulting in a mandatory life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The designation of principal meant that even though she had not personally carried out the shooting, she was being held responsible, as if she had because she had orchestrated the plan. Jermaine was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. This means she will become eligible for parole consideration in 2047. Whether she will actually be granted parole at that time will depend on numerous factors, including her behavior while incarcerated, and whether the parole board believes she has been rehabilitated. The motive for why Jermaine wanted her mother ended remains unclear from public records. There were no documented instances of conflict or mistreatment that would explain such an extreme action. This lack of apparent motive makes the case particularly disturbing, as it suggests that whatever drove Jermaine to this decision was either deeply hidden or may never be fully understood. From a plot that defied explanation to a case where resentment had been building for years. Claire Miller. Claire Miller was born in 2007 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and grew up in a household where her sister Helen had cerebral palsy that required constant care and attention. Helen's condition required significant attention and care from their parents throughout the day, and Claire felt increasingly overshadowed by her sister's needs as she grew older. By her teenage years, Claire had developed a substantial following on TikTok, with 22,000 followers who engaged with her content regularly. Despite this external validation and social media success, Claire harbored growing resentment toward Helen that festered over time. Friends and family members would later reflect that they had not realized the depth of Claire's feelings about her sister. On February 22, 2021, when Claire was 14 years old, she entered Helen's room while her sister was sleeping peacefully. Claire stabbed her 19-year-old sister, Helen, multiple times in the neck and chest. While the 7 times figure appeared in early reports, the final forensic findings showed a more sustained attack, after which Claire used a pillow in an attempt to stop the bleeding and movement. The combination of the stab wounds and the pillow placement ensured that Helen would not survive. What happened next was unusual in that Claire immediately called 911 herself. When emergency services answered, Claire stated directly that she had stabbed her sister. This immediate confession meant that there was no investigation needed to determine who had committed the act. When police arrived, they found the knife still in Helen's neck, and the forensic evidence was straightforward. Claire was arrested and underwent psychiatric evaluation. Psychiatric evaluations revealed that Claire was suffering from major depressive disorder with psychotic features. And while she was found competent to stand trial, the court accepted a plea of guilty, but mentally ill. The combination of long-term resentment toward her sister and an acute mental health crisis had created the conditions for the attack. In 2023, Claire entered a plea of guilty but mentally ill to third-degree offense charges. This type of plea acknowledges that the person committed the act but was experiencing significant mental health issues at the time. It differs from an insanity plea in that the person is still held criminally responsible, but the mental health component is recognized in sentencing. In May 2023, Claire Miller was sentenced to 12.5 to 40 years in a state correctional institution, with the judge stipulating that she receive intensive psychiatric treatment while incarcerated. The range in the sentence means that she must serve at least 12.5 years, but could potentially be released after that if the parole board determines she has been rehabilitated and is no longer a danger to anyone. If not granted parole after the minimum term, she could serve up to 40 years before being automatically released. The parole board will consider factors including her behavior in prison, her participation in mental health treatment, and assessments from psychiatric professionals about whether she has addressed the issues that led to the act. As of 2025, Claire Miller remains incarcerated with no significant updates to her case. The case highlighted how feelings of being overshadowed within a family can build over time, particularly when combined with mental health issues that go unrecognized or untreated. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.